Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to OSW Daily, where each day we discuss the key trending work-related topics with industry experts and thought leaders. Today's no different. Really happy to have our guest who's coming back for the third time, I believe, in this series. So I'm really excited to talk to Mr. Ryan Anderson. Now, before we do, I'm your host. My name is Steve Todd. I'm Global Head of Workplace at NASDAQ, and I'm also the founder of OpenSourceWorkplace.com. So what are we going to talk about today? Let's pull up today's agenda. Today we're going to talk about something that actually Ryan was probably one of the first people who approached this topic with me. And it's been around for a while, I know. Is asynchronous communication the future of work? So we're going to dig into that. What is it? How we think it's going to impact the work going forward? Will our behavioral changes made in 2020 last? Lots of us have had to make changes. Will they last through 2021 and beyond? And then what are the exciting trends of 2021 that Ryan thinks and sees? And we're going to discuss those as well. So before we do, let's bring on Ryan. Ryan, welcome back to OSW Daily. How you doing, mate?
Good, Steve. Thanks for having me back, my friend.
No, it's
Good to
great
be
to
here.
it's great to have you back, and I always enjoy our conversations. We always find plenty to talk about, so I'm looking forward to really digging into this. But for those who don't know you, Ryan, I can't believe there's many in this community who don't know you. What should they know about you?
Well, work-wise, I have a really fortunate job. I love my job. I lead global research and insights at Herman Miller, and in addition to studying things related to furniture, I mean, we're interested in what is happening around the world in terms of how we work, how we live, how we heal. I mean, there's a variety of topics that we get into. I've been in the industry a long time, long time. It's been like 26 years or something like that. And I spent a lot of years with a foot in the tech world, as you know, even left the furniture industry for a while to go to a prop tech startup. And as you can imagine, if you're interested in the future of work, understanding the role of technology is a pretty closely related topic. So I never quite became a full techie, but I certainly do enjoy talking about tech and its implications on how we live.
So, given that like frame that you've just provided to us, that tech, that future of work, you must be mulling over a lot of things, thinking deeply about a number of things right now. What are some of those things that are really causing you to sit down and really think and ask a lot of questions on?
Technology specific or even more broadly?
More broadly, mate, whatever, whichever's mulling you, keeping you up at night, so to speak, I guess.
Oh my goodness, there's so many. I've been thinking a lot about inclusion and the relationship between inclusion and wellness. And some of this is a byproduct of remote work. Remote working is always, by the way, I can hear my dog barking. Speaking of remote work, so his name is Griffin.
It's
He's saying hello. But remote work has always had some inherent inclusion challenges. If we go back a while, it could have been something pretty simple like somebody who's not in the conference room being on a speakerphone but never getting a chance to get a word in edgewise. But the topic is actually far more complicated. And as we've been working remotely, exclusively remotely, for most of us for a year, it's gotten really interesting and really complex. In some ways, I think it's helped people who may have had marginalized voices in the past have a fresh voice. You know, they have equal status on a Zoom call. But it's also created a whole different set of challenges. And my mind right now is thinking about a return to workplace where more of a hybrid model is employed in most organizations, and you've got an ever evolving cohort of people that are co-located, but also a group that aren't. And I'm curious to know, and I'm thinking a lot about how we can look not just to the places, but the practices to try to make sure everyone's voice is heard and that what we don't get are highly fractured team behaviors. So that's one. I'm thinking a lot about home, actually. We have a vested interest in how people live within their homes and the furniture that we sell within homes, which at one point, we had a more clear vertical market segmentation where you might say, this is furniture for hospitality, this is furniture for higher ed, this is furniture for the office, and this is furniture for homes. And those broke down a long time ago. But right now, our homes are where we live, work, heal, learn, play. I mean, everything's happening at home. And it's also so deeply tied to our health that we're taking a fresh look, actually, at what it means to support people in their homes as well. So I know that might not traditionally be viewed as part of workplace, but as organizations pursue more of a hub and spoke mindset, yes, corporate office, yes, flex space, but I think we have to be more attentive to how people are doing, actually, their physical health, but also their cognitive and social health as well.
Yeah, no, there's a couple of things I definitely want to follow up on, and I think that last point, though, what you're talking about the health and well-being, I think we're going to talk a little bit later as well about some of the behavioral changes. I think that's one of the things we have to acknowledge in 2020. There has been a greater appreciation of wellness at home and what that means, especially for the mental side of things, right?
It does. And, we haven't shared this research publicly, but I'll give you a little sneak peek. We provided a tool several months ago that we designed with our well-being experts, which is WFH, which stands for work from home, wfh.hermanmiller.com, which provides anyone the chance just to kind of assess their own work from home situation. It gets into the furniture a little bit, but actually it's getting into lighting and when you take a break and your level of social isolation or connectivity. Well, we've had over 16,000 people use it, and the
Wow.
data is beginning to paint a really interesting picture. Probably the biggest surprise, I'll steal my own thunder, is that 60% of those 16,000 people listed their primary challenge as being able to focus and be productive, which deeply challenges the old paradigm that, well, you can go home to do focus work. And I will admit that things are exacerbated right now. We've got kids learning from home. We've got partners sitting feet from each other trying to be on video calls. But I do think we need to take a fresh look at whether or not people, as they work from home, truly are equipped to even be able to concentrate on the most important work that they've got, or whether or not offices actually need to begin to pick up the slack and provide a lot better places to focus. There's all these anecdotal stories of hotels, like one not too far from you in Brooklyn, the Wythe, but I've heard this in
Hmm.
Tokyo and elsewhere, where the hotels, to make money but also to meet a need, have stopped worrying about people staying there overnight and instead are focusing on giving people a focused place to do work during the day. So there's a few unmet needs that we need to spend a lot more time thinking about as a result of what we've learned this year. But that's a good thing. Now that we know, we can solve those problems.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about that productivity. People feel they're not or they're less productive at home for all the reasons that you said. A lot of folks that I've chatted with actually say the opposite. I am hearing, and again, it's all about perspective. It's all about who's answering and sort of completing different forms, I guess. But yeah, what I'm predominantly seeing is a lot more people feel it's a lot easier to do focused work at home and they feel more productive. Now we can guess what, or we can ascertain what productivity really means, but that's certainly what their perspectives are. And again, we don't know what their objectives are. So what again? But what I want to go back to the first thing you said though, because we talked about, you said place versus process. We think about the future of work and we think about the office and we think about that hybrid solution. Do you think process is the most important element rather than the place at this point? Because you know.
Yeah, we use a framework, people, process, place, and those are in order of importance.
Mm.
Which is not to say that place is not important, but it starts with the people, understanding how people are doing, what their intrinsic motivations are, what kind of relationships they have with one another and their organization. Then the process is really important, and we need to understand what what an optimized process really looks like. And then the space actually needs to come along to support that. And when I say the space, any space where somebody
Yeah.
is, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
wherever they're parking their rear end on a chair, hopefully a Herman Miller chair, like we need to understand who they are and what they're doing in order to support that well. And I think everything is in flux a little bit, and I think we subscribe to the belief that most of the changes happening are accelerations rather than pivots. So that's good. We can look back to the last 10 years or beyond to try to anticipate where some of this is going, but that's the framework we use. Let's start with the people, then let's understand their process, and then we'll get to the place after that. If you're familiar with the classic and somewhat controversial book by Christopher Alexander, A Pattern Language, which is really an urban planning book, it is a good example of how we can take a look at those in succession and do placemaking and furniture application design accordingly.
No, that's great, and I love some of the deep insights that yourself and Herman Miller provide. And you go back over the years. We've talked about this in the past. It's fascinating, and I love rereading things that are years old because they're still applicable today. It's just tremendous to see. But one of the things we talked about, process there, and you brought this up to me. I don't know, it must have been like 6 months ago, whatever it was now, about asynchronous communication and how that's going to transform. And you were discussing a project with me on how you wanted to operate this in this using this sort of strategy and process, right? So one is how to go with that, because I myself have found it a real challenge to get into that mindset. Certain activities are a lot easier to get into that asynchronous process, but other things are more of a challenge. I'm just curious as to what you've experienced.
It went very well for us. So I'll provide a little bit of background, and I probably should define just a few terms. So synchronous communication is what we're doing, what you and I are doing right now, which is essentially interacting at the same time. Asynchronous means we're interacting in different times. Both can be part of a collaborative process, by the way. In fact, if you try to structure a collaborative process with purely synchronous interactions, it's extremely taxing. And the future for me has to do with a better balance between the two. It's not that asynchronous needs to replace synchronous. It needs basically people who run different sort of projects, and it can be anything, any team project, need to think about how to balance these things out in new ways. And in my previous role at Herman Miller, I led digital innovation. I was VP of digital innovation, and I had a globally distributed team members in Sweden, Lebanon, Mexico, the Carolinas, Michigan. Now, interestingly, most had access to some sort of office space. So we're not talking about remote working here. We're talking about distributed working. The challenge was that we were never going to be in the same place unless there was quite a bit of orchestration. And we did. We got together now and then. But we decided from the outset that we would primarily use asynchronous means of communication, and it went swimmingly. So we chose Slack as our platform. There's a whole host of others. I mean, email is an asynchronous platform, Basecamp, the teams within Microsoft Teams. There's a variety of ways you can do it. But what we did is we set up a Slack channel dedicated to the project, actually a whole series of them. And the team members in Sweden and Lebanon would start their day when I was still asleep. I'm not like you. I know you start the day at 3 a.m. But they were going, and it was a digital process, which helped. It doesn't have to be, but it certainly does help. And then by the time I jumped into the workday, along with colleagues in the Carolinas, we could take a look at what they'd done, offer some suggestions. They would continue to riff on it until early afternoon our time or lunchtime our time, and then gave us a chance to continue to process and digest, and we would leave feedback that they would pick up in the morning. The team would have about an hour to an hour and a half worth of calls a week, but everything else was done in that manner. And we knew each other and got to know each other and got to trust each other across distance. We actually had been working together for many months before we physically co-located. And when we did, it was all about having some fun. We got together in Atlanta and went out to eat and got to know each other and learned about each other's lives. And that's really, really important. But no, a process that it biases itself towards asynchronous interaction can actually be much faster. It's much more respectful of time zones. But the big thing is it respects people's mental state and their mental flow so that they can do the sort of work that they need to do in the moment. I can't remember if I shared this with you, Steve, but I'll just quickly reference it. There was a piece of work done at Wharton Business School in 2010. Dr. Carl Ulrich did this study where he took two groups of students, which all happened to be on campus, by the way. This was not about distributed teams. And he had one group get into a room for an hour and come up with new ideas. And the belief was they'll riff on each other and come up with great ideas. Another group he asked to think about new ideas on their own for a half an hour and then talk about them for a half an hour. And the study they published indicated that that second method was far more effective, both in terms of the number of ideas and the quality of ideas. But I think, and they indicated this, that it's better to be able to let people do really important type of thinking and different sorts of work when they have a moment to figure out when it's best. If you've ever come into a meeting sight unseen and had somebody be like, we need an answer from you or come up with an idea. You're like, it takes 20 minutes to even get into that flow. So my experience is that asynchronous processes can be faster, more effective, and just maintain a better quality of life than being scheduled to death on Zoom calls. I mean, I had a day the other day where I had 11 meetings, and compare that to probably 5 meetings in my previous role. And I'm not complaining here, but it's not sustainable. We cannot deal with that degree of synchronous interaction on a daily basis and still have time to think or be creative and do the kinds of individual contributions that we need to be really innovative as a team.
Yeah, no, there's a lot you said there, and I can only speak from my own personal experience. Like I know when someone gives me a question and I say, okay, give me time to think about it, give me overnight to think about this, the answer I will provide to them the next day is so much better, so much bigger because my brain's had an opportunity to think about it. I wake up in the morning, a shower, whatever it is, and all of a sudden that sort of those ideas come to mind. It's so much more fruitful. And I'm working on a project right now, and we're all using Teams. We're all in a document. We're all working side by side, and it is phenomenal. The amount of work we can get through in such a reduced time it's incredible. Now, obviously, as teams are more distributed and people will have this hybrid system of working in the future, I think that's the reason why most people are saying that this is the future of work and how people need to communicate going forward.
You're right. The more distributed the team, the more you have to do this because
Yeah.
time zones become such a limiter. Otherwise, there's some, you know, poor soul in Sydney or Hong Kong who's spending their 6 a.m. or their 9 p.m. dealing with a bunch of people in the States or in Western Europe. And it's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
I also think there's just a real efficiency narrative here. In fact, I'm going to borrow from Jason Fried's book Remote. He talks about this a little bit in what he calls meeting math. And so I'll use an example from my life. I was part of a team where there was about 12 people in a department, and we had a weekly status meeting where each person took about 4 or 5 minutes, excuse me, and you could ask questions or whatever. You could say that took an hour, but it actually didn't. It took 12 hours of individual productivity time to do that. And instead, you can switch to a Slack channel or a Microsoft Teams channel, have everybody post their update. Each person, let's say they take 10 minutes to scan it and make a few comments. Well, 10 minutes times 12, you're into 120 minutes or 2 hours of individual productivity time. So by the cancellation of one meeting, you've
Right.
given that team 10 additional hours of individual productivity. And people, once they start this, begin to realize it like, wow, that was really effective. So the real art of this is to figure out when synchronous is really important, but not to start there. In fact, I almost never start a conversation with someone with a meeting. I'll always send them a chat or an email or a phone call, and just like, hey, do you mind if we chat about this? If it warrants it, I'll put a meeting. And if the meeting feels like it wraps up early, I'll say, I feel like this meeting was a real success, and we have 12 minutes left. Because for some reason, people feel this obligatory thing where it's like, well, it was scheduled for an hour. I feel like we should just keep talking. Ideally, we want to get out of that trap and say, no, let's give people as much individual productivity time as we can and make sure the group interactions are meaningful, including, by the way, just social hangout time sometimes. But things like weekly status updates, no thanks.
No,
Not
I
for
hear
me.
you. I hear you, and I am becoming a believer given some of the projects that I'm working on and some of the benefits I've seen, and I almost think of asynchronous is what my generation coming through what email was for the generation before. It's almost that complete different mindset, a different approach to different things, and obviously certain tasks are much better done that way than sync in a synchronous way. But so whenever we think about behavioral changes, 2020, what it's brought. You know,
Yeah.
um, what changes are really in your mind this has been a real important year for that type of change.
Well, I think on the upside, and I do think while this year has been brutal, I think there are some really lasting upsides. It has forced everyone to reevaluate their processes, right? So we talked about people, process, place. The processes have gotten a lot of attention. I'm a little concerned that people haven't gotten enough attention, but maybe we'll talk about that later. The processes have been rethought by and large, and I do think that a lot of organizations and a lot of team members have thought, how can I do things digitally in the future that are faster, more effective, in some cases simpler. And I would expect that our use of tools will continue to just amplify. In fact, I think it's worth debating whether or not once people are back in the office readily, if they'll go into a room for a video meeting or whether or not they'll continue to take things from their personal laptop, as an example. But then there's a lot of things that we haven't fully learned yet, right? The pendulum swung so hard. We were we were in the office, but we were working in a distributed way, meaning we probably most of us worked several places in the course of a week. And then everything was denied to us. Couldn't go to the coffee shop, couldn't go to our suppliers, couldn't work on an airplane or a hotel. It was like you go to your residence. And I don't even usually use the term home office because only, oh, I can't remember the number from our research, but it was certainly less than half of people had a dedicated office at home. And we've coped, but once we get into more of a hybrid situation, the next round of learning is really people, I think, will realize that they can curate their work week in much more empowered ways. I think it's going to be a great thing, actually,
Mm.
where people suddenly realize, well, hang on, this is the place that I focus best in the office or at home or at the coffee shop. This is a place where I would most like to meet up with a couple of my colleagues. And we'll begin to see people really fully take advantage of that newfound freedom because you could say that we've had it. Well, we haven't. I mean, yes, employers were resistant to allowing people to work remotely, but did we really gain freedom? No, we were forced into
Yeah.
our homes. The freedom will come later, and
Right.
that'll be a good thing.
Yeah, no, it will, and I think that's important to remember. This is not remote working, right? This is restricted. This is like lockdown remote working. It's completely different. No, I totally agree with you. And some of the things that I've been thinking about, since we were sort of mulling over what to discuss today, and I was thinking I've been reflected through 2020 and looking at what are the big things that are really really changed and really been really good. And I have to think empathy is something that just has flooded through every organization, relationships. I think that's one of the tremendous things that I've never seen so many people talk about it. Leadership, using empathy, being talked about. That's a new way to lead. I think communication has went to another level within organizations.
Mm-hmm.
I think leadership has communicated way more than they ever would, and I think employees are really loving that and feeling part
Mm-hmm.
of it, part of the team. And I hope these are some of the things that have changed, and I hope they do continue through 2021. I don't know if you've got other things that's sort of a front of mind for you, but those are some of the things that I've sort of taken away, and I just really hope that they really do continue.
Oh, I agree. I love that we check in with each other more and that we want to know how each other's pets are doing and things of that nature. I'd
That's
also
true.
take it a step farther and say, I think 2020 was a chance in certain parts of the world, and certainly the US and the UK would be examples, where business leaders really stepped up, in some cases in ways that government wasn't able to. And protecting the health of their employees, it was one of them. And keeping the economy rolling was another. And I think the emphasis on more purpose-driven organizations with a higher level of social responsibility. I do think that we've just begun talking about things like mental health and our impact on each other in ways that was long overdue, and
Yeah.
that's a good thing. And yeah, I really hope that does continue.
I absolutely do, absolutely do. So we think about 2021. I'm not going to get you into making 2021 predictions because that's just embarrassing for you and me if we start that conversation. But what are the things that sort of excite you? Right, we think about technology. We know you love technology. I mean, are there tools, are there companies out there that are creating things that you go, I never thought of that, or that's really something else that we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, there's a lot of things for 2021 that are on my mind, and I don't mind making some predictions
All right.
because it's so close that it feels like I could just forecast out a little bit of what we're already seeing. But maybe we'll just use it as food for thought versus an official prediction. One thing that's on my mind, and it's not just on my mind, it's on our whole research and insight team mind, is that I think we're going to need to see a level of post occupancy flexibility in the workspace that is far greater than what we have seen for one simple reason. It's pretty darn near, I don't want to say impossible, but extremely difficult to do good program development right now, right? So if you've got a project, are you going to go ask the people how they work? Well, they haven't been in the office for a year. Are you going to ask them about their processes or their tools? Well, they just adopted 5 new ones in the last 6 months. We've been going through this with, we're redesigning our retail headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut, as an example. And our design team couldn't actually even go to the space. They never got to see the space they were designing because of travel restrictions. So as a result, part of the strategy was equip the space with such a high degree of user flexibility, elements that the users could either purposefully or almost subconsciously just begin to address and morph a little bit more because it's risk mitigation. It's also just practical. And we've been saying for a long time, we want to equip people to be able to adapt their space a little bit more. So I do think that we're going to be talking a lot in 2021 about spaces that are designed with the best of intentions, but acknowledge that they may not be right. And let's face it, it's never been possible to get it all right. And place a lot more power in the hands of the employees to be able to adapt it. Now, we need to be able to communicate that with employees, which means there also needs to be a greater emphasis on change management, which certainly is not anything new. But if you're going to design a space for a group of users that everybody kind of knows it's ambiguous in terms of how they work or how they're going to work, you have to be able to say, well, we're giving you the chance to adapt this over time. Other 2021 predictions on the tech side, it's kind of funny. We've really seen the most powerful tech tools support us individually rather than as groups. So most of the tools that we've talked about, whether it's Zoom or Slack or Microsoft Teams, et cetera, I mean, they're definitely for group use, but they're used individually. And I'd make the case that they're optimized for use when people are in separate locations. Zoom would be a great example. There are Zoom rooms. You can equip a room with it, and it's a nice experience as long as nobody opens up their laptop, nobody joins the meeting, because you're going to get all that crazy feedback. But even in the best of situation, the 5 people in the room are going to be tiny on the screen for all the rest of the participants who are represented individually. The prop tech or CRE tech world has been focused a lot on use within the office. Scheduling platforms would be a good example. I would like to think that these worlds are going to begin to bleed over into each other a little bit and start supporting people on their journey throughout their work week. So if I just had some basic needs, like I would like to find a place to meet up with 3 of my colleagues this month, on these days. I live in Long Island. There's a couple of people in Brooklyn. Where should we meet? Maybe it's in the office. Maybe it's in a flex space. Google Maps will tell me how to get to the building. Is there anything that will help me navigate the building? There's some emerging platforms, user experience platforms that are beginning to put some of these together, but we're living in a situation right now where the best technologies for buildings essentially help you in the buildings, and the best technologies for remote collaboration help you when you're somewhere else. And we need to see IT leaders really, and this really does boil down to IT in a lot of ways, begin to say, let's take a more user-centered journey through a typical hybrid work week and see a hybrid set of tools, just in the same way we're thinking about hybrid work environments. That probably will begin in 2021. I don't think it'll see full reconciliation, but I do think we'll see a bump in some of the key prop tech and CRE tech solutions that we've been talking about for years, but that are even more relevant now to help with the change management, help with eliminating user frictions, and help with occupancy planning that we know have gotten so much more complicated this year than in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, just even that occupancy planning, I think some of the tools, the innovation that we've seen come into the market at the moment, that's just accelerated, I think, where we were and what we're going to. And I think 21 is going to be where that's going to go again. 22 is probably where we're going to see the real benefits of all that technology, all that innovation. And we're going to look back, I think, in 2020, and we're going to go on, that's when we created this. It's just going to be all these companies that have just come to fruition. And because of the way we're going to be working in the future, I think we're going to be looking back on, that was a big year. That was a big year.
Yeah, and not to get too into the startup prop tech scene, but I think we'll see some acquisition and merger activity within prop tech too. I mean, it's been ripe for some consolidation for a while, but I think some of the the bigger companies in that space are beginning to realize just how important a few of those emerging feature sets from some of the startups are. And we already saw some of it last year as well. So I think we'll see more. The topic of workplace analytics, well, I'm not blowing sunshine at you because I say this to people all the time, but of the hundreds or thousands of customers that I've had a chance to interact with over the years, there is no one that has thought more or done more around workplace analytics than you have in your work at NASDAQ. So you can teach us all a little bit. But in a world where workplace is on demand, you have to learn how to measure demand. So facilities and real estate people have to begin to act more as marketers, creating desirable spaces that people want to come to, more as data scientists, which I know is a term that most people wouldn't necessarily immediately embrace, but there's got to be better measures of, do we have the right amount of space? Do people want to come to the space? Are they finding what they need in the space? What impact does commute time have on overall occupancy planning? I mean, there's dozens of questions that I know you've been tracking for years, but most of us haven't. We got into workplace analytics with the sensor product years ago. We've been doing sensor studies for almost 12 years. But even then, the questions have gotten so much more pressing right now because it's extremely difficult for anyone to know exactly what their portfolio should look like. So, along with end user flexibility, workplace analytics probably going to be right up there in terms of the things we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I appreciate your very kind words there. And it's the commute time is such a big thing at the moment. If you think about it, right? So when we understand that most employees spend 45 minutes commuting to the office one way, so why are we asking them to come to the office, right? What is the real benefit? What is the additional value to the employee, to the organization, to the team, for them to come? It's a huge, huge question. The one thing that sort of I would add to what you're saying that sort of I think is going to be key in 2021, the sense of community. How do we build a community within an organization, within a location? How do we think about that? And community is a lot more than just like being physical and running events. It's how do you connect people, right? I almost think of it as threads that we weave across locations and through departments, and that thread may be running, table tennis, football, whatever it is. It could be crockery, it could be cooking, it could be whatever. But how do we do that? And how do we provide employees with the ability and the license to create that themselves? Employees want to go back to the office to see colleagues. How do we do that? How do we engage with it? How do we enable that and not sort of take ownership as a company so that it becomes and feels like a corporate program? I think that's going to be a huge thing going forward as well.
I do too. By the way, I don't have permission to use their name, but there's a tech company. I think we've got some mutual friends there in the real estate team that has started using a very different sort of user persona framework, where basically they have modeled out several personas primarily based on proximity. So it's like the persona of the person that can be in the office this afternoon, the persona of the person that could be here tomorrow, and the persona of the person that could be here next week based on those proxemics. And then if you look at each of their user journeys, many of the things that we've discussed begin to get really clear. Like for that person who's living in Montana, but the office is in Northern California, what does it look like to support her? Technologically, spatially, community, all of that, versus the person who's like right down the street and maybe has a totally different level of engagement with the space and the people. It's not a bad approach. And it makes me think that that would be a really good tool for future program development, because then at the very least you could take a framework like that to a team leader and say, well, I know things are very different, but I think we've got 4 people that fit that one and 12 people that fit that one, because somehow we have to come up with methodologies where we take a more user-centered approach. And to your point, community and that level of connectedness with the people should be a part of it.
Yeah.
So should their technological tool set.
Yeah. No, 100%, 100%. So we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes, but any last words for us, Ryan?
Oh man, rarely am I unprepared for a question like that. No, other than I'm just so appreciative of this platform that you've created. I think, well, I know, and I don't mean to tell your story, but coming into the facilities and real estate world with such an interesting finance background, that you had this desire to try to share best practices and connect with others. One of the silver linings of this year is that so many more people who may have generally been in a flow are now asking such deeper questions that I don't think there's ever been a more interesting time to share new ideas and best practices. I love it because my job allows me to do that on a daily basis. But no, I'm grateful you've created a community that does it.
No, thank you, and I totally agree with you. The amount of people who are producing phenomenal content at the moment is just staggering. Every day I come across somebody new, and I scratch my head, and I see it in two ways. One is I've got to step up my game, but two, this is content that has been circulated that is so thoughtful, so deep, and it just again promotes additional questions and additional conversations, which I love.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to continue to gain our most trusted insights from the communities of people that we believe in.
Right.
I don't know that it's always the brand or whatever that's putting their name on a report that garners trust anymore. In fact, we do future scenario planning, and we're starting another process like that next year. But we did one in 2012 where we looked at all these different ways that the future can unfold. One of the stories we came up with was called New Normal, and one of the foundational beliefs is that we maybe will trust institutional things less in the future and be more and more reliant upon communities to guide us in our decision making. So, I mean, I hope that Herman Miller continues to produce really, really useful, helpful insights. And I hope that so many others in the industry do, and that organizations like Gartner and others do. But I think most of us will make our decisions about where we're going to take our next, our next project or our next strategy based on these conversations.
Mm.
Everybody wants to know what other people are doing and thinking so that we can process through this information together and ultimately feel like we can trust the insights that we glean from it.
Great, great. No, I 100% agree, and I hope so. Obviously, is given what I'm doing. That's certainly one of the reasons, my motivations to create an open source workplace. So Ryan, look, we'll put links to you so people can reach out and connect you. But what's the best way to reach you?
Always LinkedIn. I love the platform. I try to share useful insights on a pretty much a daily basis. I rarely do promotional stuff, but every once in a while I brag on the company that I love so much. But yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn.
There you go. There you go. As I said, we'll put links below. But so Ryan, look, thank you. I appreciate your time today. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll speak to you soon, mate.
Thank you, my friend.
Cheers.
Appreciate being here.
Cheers.